I mentioned digital wallets. Kiah, I have a question for you that I'd like to segue to, if that's okay.
Yes.
Okay. This is my question under the category of possibly unanswerable, because I don't know that there is a good answer, but I think it's worth poking at. Kiah, should banks offer digital wallets?
Alex, I don't know, but I think they want to offer digital wallets, but
Okay.
I think they want, this is my outside consumer who kind of doesn't really understand any of these moves, but let's talk about them. I think they want to offer digital wallets because other companies offer digital wallets. And so this is a thing that they're doing because someone else did it first. And then they realized like they were a natural option to offer the wallet and are trying to get back into this. But frankly, I don't understand. Like, to me, this seems completely solved and addressed. And it is so interesting to me that digital wallets is this new battleground for both regulators and tech companies and big banks. And I don't think consumers like me care about digital wallets. So every time I read a digital wallet thing, I'm a little confused because it has not been answered in that like article or whatever of like, how does this help consumers? And how is this not just going to be one more app or one more thing or one more place their information is stored? So why should banks offer digital wallets?
Well, so I think the question you asked a little bit ago is the exact right one, which is like, isn't this already a solved problem? And what it exactly reminds me of is it reminds me of P2P payments a lot, right? Which is to say there's this thing, right? There's this analog thing that exists. So in the case of P2P payments, it was cash, right? Like, hey, Kiah, we went out to lunch. You owe me, $15 and you give me $15 out of your wallet. Done deal. And then banks sort of just assumed that the way that consumers were doing this activity, this P2P payments activity, would continue on the way that it always has been forever, and missed an underlying shift in technology that opened up an opportunity to create a different version of that product, which is P2P payments apps. So then a whole bunch of non-bank companies come in and go, ooh, this would be cool. Like, what if you didn't have to give Kiah cash? What if I could just Venmo her the balance for lunch? And a whole ecosystem is born out of that. And what banks then realize, seeing that, is they go, well, we should have been the ones to do that. And again, this kind of is like my whole, like, what's good for a bank is not always good for a consumer thing. Like, yeah, I get that you're upset by that, but then banks were like, well, we have to get into P2P. And I can tell you this from firsthand experience, talking to a lot of bank executives about P2P over the years, the level to which they were haunted by Venmo for years was startling. Like, you'd ask a bank about fintech stuff, you'd ask a bank executive or CEO, and the first thing they would say would be like, well, my kids, or in a lot of cases, my grandkids, they use Venmo, so we have to do that.
Yeah, it really bothered them.
Yeah, like it was the one thing that broke into their consciousness was like, we have to do something about Venmo. And you're like, you'd ask them questions like, well, are you really losing any like payments volume because of Venmo? Or like, is this meaningfully changing like the nature of the relationships you have with your customers? Or like, what's like the business case for wanting to compete with Venmo? They're like, we just have to do it. And you're like, okay. And so then EWS comes out with Zelle and, makes an acquisition, launches Zelle. And again, I can tell you from firsthand experience, the sales process for Zelle was like not based on business logic at all. It was really like, you will sign up for Zelle. And you're like, well, okay, do we need it? They're like, oh, you need it. And it's like, is it going to be expensive or is it cheap? They're like, oh, it's going to be really expensive. And you're like, okay, can I charge my customers money for it? They're like, no, you can't charge your customers any money for it. And you're like, okay, is the money going to move on like kind of traditional ACH rails? They're like, no, the money's going to move in real time. And you're like, okay, but won't that create a big fraud problem? They're like, oh, the fraud problem is massive. And you're like, okay, well, I guess we got to do it. And it's like the whole conversation made no sense. And yet everybody was just like, well, we have to do it. We have to get on board with it. And so Zelle becomes this like thing, not because it made sense or because it necessarily filled a huge gap for consumers. Now, I will say the real-time thing, Zelle has kind of carved out a lane for itself over time, kind of by brute force, particularly around larger transactions. So people pay their rent or things that are more time sensitive with Zelle.
Yeah.
So I mean, Zelle just by nature of like the network effect that banks had, it kind of forced its way in to the party.
Right.
but it wasn't like people were looking around going like, this is a massively unsolved problem. Like that's not what was happening. And so to your point, I think digital wallets are exactly the same, where banks were like, okay, so the analog solution here is people just have actual like leather wallets that they keep with them. And that has a lot of their payment instruments in it. It has identity cards, it has rewards, it has a bunch of different things. Like, cool, wallets are solved. Like, we don't need to worry about that. And then companies like PayPal and Apple and Google, all appear. I guess Twitter is maybe getting into payments. Like these companies appear and they're like, well, what if there was a digital wallet? And you're like, okay. And, they present a vision of what a digital wallet can look like. And it's convenient in some ways, right? I don't know if you're a big user of like Apple Pay or anything, but there are parts about it that are nice and kind of convenient. And they can even now like digitize a driver's license in certain states and put it in there. And I feel like we're playing this whole P2P thing out again, where banks are looking at this and going like, well, shit, we should have been the ones to do a digital wallet. Like, why did they get to do a digital wallet? We should do a digital wallet. And they're, again, ignoring the question of, well, is anyone asking for another digital wallet? Like, are we kind of set on digital wallets? And they're like, no, you need to have a digital wallet.